Nick at Night, Nick Jr., Nicktoons, any way you consumed your Nickelodeon, you always knew you were in for a scary good time. Me, myself, denied. Growing up on a farm setback far from the road certainly had its drawbacks, one of which was that the cable company simply would not install cable lines to the house. Alas, my Nick fix was limited to brief moments of viewing bliss at my old grandmother's house. This means I unfortunately missed out on a lot of classic Nicktoons, which brings me to my inspiration for this episode, Real Monsters. Debuting October of '94, about 10 years after me, and running for 4 seasons, Real Monsters was developed by Klasky Csupo, perhaps best known for his work on The Simpsons, Rugrats, and The Wild Thornberrys, and it featured the 3 hair-raising protagonists, Ickis, Oblina, and Crumb. Ickis resembles something close to a hairless rabbit gremlin hybrid, Oblina looks like part stick bug, part umbrella stem, but make it a mime, and finally there's Crumb. His fleshy appearance isn't unlike a ball sack with eyes in his hands, complete with pube-esque tufts of hair. The 3 grotesque amigos attend school below ground to learn how to frighten humans, which proves to be more challenging than it sounds. They'll bumble through their class assignments each time they come to the surface. Like many Nicktoons, it's a simple enough premise that results in a metric buttload of adventures. That's a real measurement, by the way, look it up. You'll thank me later. Now here's where things get really interesting for you voice acting enthusiasts out there. None other than Frankenfurter himself, Tim Curry, has a reoccurring role on the show, but he's not the only one you'll recognize. The cast included other big names like Jim Belushi, Charlie Adler, who also voiced Buster Bunny in Tiny Toon Adventures, and Earthworm Jim, perhaps a future episode in the making there, as well as Christine Cavanaugh, who has roles in Darkwing Duck, Rugrats, and even Sonic the Hedgehog. It was a pretty star-studded cast for animation and gaming fans. Speaking of Rugrats, no, it wasn't a fever dream. The Real Monsters cast did actually appear on an episode of Rugrats in a pretty epic crossover. Nickelodeon has always loved pulling these kinds of stunts, mashing their shows together for some wild plot lines. From one-off episodes to comic books, some of these memorable crossovers were also the most bizarre. Even I have a distinct memory of the Spider-Man Ren and Stimpy crossover. I had that issue. So then, like all the at least moderately successful franchises from the 90s, the show's popularity inevitably led to a video game tie-in that came to both the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Released on August 15th of 1995, less than a year after the debut of the cartoon, the game was developed by Real-Time Associates and published by Viacom New Media, which was Nick's parent company at the time. Lead programmers on the game included the likes of Andy Shung of Gex Enter the Gecko fame on the SNES version, and Jim Schuler for the Genesis version, who went on to work on a few small franchises like Medal of Honor and Call of Duty. The game loosely follows the plot of the cartoon series, with the monsters on a quest to scare humans in order to pass their monster midterm exams. I initially thought this game was going to be a lot like a Lost Viking style title, as you have the ability to swap between the 3 monsters at will, but that's really not what this game is. Now, you might be wondering what version of the game is superior, the SNES or Genesis, and I just may have the answer for you because I suffered through both. There are some differences between the 2 titles, and the most obvious is the controls. On the Genesis, you have to hold the D-pad down and press the A button to switch between characters. That's not the case on the SNES, where it has just a single button tap. But before we jump into which version reigns supreme, let's discuss some of the similarities so we can set a baseline. In both versions of the game, each monster has a scare ability in order to frighten humans. You can also throw trash at enemies and jump, as the game does feature some not so great platforming. Every monster also has a unique team-up ability, which again is clunky to perform on the Genesis version in particular. Oblina, for example, can stack the other 2 monsters and use them as a step stool of sorts to reach higher areas. Crumb, who is mostly useless in this game, has the eerie eye ejector, where he removes his eyeball to see further down the screen. You do have a health meter to watch out for, and each level has an assigned prize for you to try to discover. This isn't an optional assignment, as you're forced to find this item before you can complete the level. There are checkpoints within the levels as well, and you can even find some invincibility power-ups, in this case, a diaper. There's trash bags for garbage-related abilities, all sorts of junk like apple cores that restore health. While this isn't a full review, I'll be as real with you as these monsters. This game sucks. The camera is wonky, the platforming feels miserable, level design is passable at best, and there's a serious imbalance between characters and in general. All of that said, the developers did capture some of the overall vibes of the show with some nice pixel art and decent auditory offerings, particularly from the Genesis version. In fact, if you'd like my humble opinion, I preferred the Genesis version overall. It just felt smoother to me in the way it performed, but it's a catch-22 because the controls on the Genesis version are markedly worse. I think if the Genesis version had supported the 6-button controller, it would have made this more of a no-brainer. In the end, you're stuck with kind of a bad compromise either way. Which do you value more? Decent controls or smooth performance? Answer that question and you'll know which version to purchase. There are some other minor differences between the games, including different bonus stages, differences in the animations, levels and sound effects, and some other small things here or there, but in the end, what I learned from making this video is that Aaahh Monsters is a pretty entertaining show even today, but it's a miserable video game experience. Let's just say the real scares are the lack of quality franchise-based games. That's gonna wrap this one up, folks. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed this content to preserve the past, and check out our main channel if indie gaming is more your thing. I'll put a link in the description box below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all beneath the dump for our next class.